Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Spectrum, live on Radio 1 FM 90. We are broadcasting from the Central Building, the home of this radio station. We are live on its website, www.radio1fm90.com. You click on the icon with the word Listen Live. You can also find this radio station on the different radio listening apps, including TuneIn, Afro Mobile, and many others, which you can obtain from the App Store of your smartphone. When you download those radio listening apps, you look for Radio 1 FM 90. And as long as you have an internet connection, you should be able to listen to us from anywhere across this globe. Radio 1 also offers you another opportunity to listen to it via a TV set. If you have a DSTV connection, you look for audio channel 897. You'll be live with us for all our quality programming. My name is Kenneth Anderson Lukwago, your host. Today we'll be looking at lessons that we can take from the leadership of the late Pope Francis. We know Pope Francis did pass away on Easter Monday, that was yesterday, after reigning over the Catholic Church for 12 years. He did visit Uganda in 2015 and led Holy Mass at the Namugongo Martyrs Shrine, baptized Uganda, the land of martyrs. And a lot has been said about him, including describing him as a pontiff of peace for peace, and that is because of his love for peace, not only love but also actions, including pilgrimage that he made in the name of peace, including that very important visit that he made in South Sudan, where he symbolically kissed the feet of South Sudanese President General Salva Kiir and his political nemesis Dr. Riek Machar, urging them to foster peace. As we speak now, there's, a conflict in that country, and already our forces are in that country to try and help to foster peace. The Pope also did visit the DRC, which we know is also a hotbed of conflict, but also the Central African Republic. So we'll be paying tribute to him, and you can kindly share with us your thoughts and what you remember about him via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090. Tell us what you remember about Pope Francis and what lessons can our leaders take from his papacy that has been for 12 years. But we should also remember he has also been a head of state, as a head of the state of the Vatican, which is located within the confines of Rome. This evening I have two people to share with us their thoughts about this discussion. One of them is already here in studio. Let me introduce Mr. Isaac Kayonde. He's a political and policy analyst. He comes from the National Resistance Movement Party. Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, viewers.
Indeed, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Kayonde. We also expect Mr. Kasacha Mubiru Henry, Executive Director, Dialogue and Democracy Training Center. He comes from the Democratic Party, to join us shortly. Well, let me begin with you, Mr. Isaac Kayonde. If you look at the commentaries that have come in from different leaders across the world, including some of those here in our country, we have not yet heard from President Yoweri Museveni, but we have heard from the Catholic Church here, we have heard from the Speaker of Parliament, who had an opportunity to have audience with the Pope a number of times. We have heard from the different leaders who have commented about the life and the works of Pope Francis. What strikes you from what the Pope was able to accomplish as a leader over the last 12 years?
Thank you very much. I think the Pope was a very influential figure in the world. He exemplified leadership and all its different facets. Him being a leader, he stood out for about maybe three things. He was a bit of a politician. Was a bit of a politician by the fact that he's the head of the Vatican. He was a diplomat, sorting out a few issues, and then of course there was the spiritual element about it. And in all those spheres, he played his very crucial role. He was a man of peace. I had the opportunity to go and see him in 2015 in Kololo, but his humility was something that was something to behold. It left a mark on me. Seeing him kissing young babies, and how he was interacting with the children, with the young people. He was not a show-off. he exemplified his humility by riding in the pop mobile. You know, he lived a very simple life, and anybody who aspires to be a leader would emulate his humility and be able to show dedicated servant leadership that he exemplified. I think for me, the other thing is that his commentary on everything around the world, whether it was politics, wars, social issues such as corruption, you know, famine, and all those other aspects, was something that he got really passionate about, involved. We can never, of course, forget the scandals that he managed to kind of like
deal with
in the Catholic Church. It came at his at his time, some resignations there in the cardinals and everything. So he has handled his tenure very well, and I hope that other leaders might learn a few things from him.
All right. You begin by pointing out the issue of humility, which also somebody would say is a sign of servant leadership. Let's try to bring it to the current leadership that we have in our different countries. This issue of humility, and how can the current leaders emulate that? What is it in speech, action? How can we emulate humility as leaders?
Well, of course, as African leaders, I mean, they are preoccupied by the fanfare and the pomp that gets around their positions, and that sometimes gets them out of the position, and the trappings of power get to their head, and they tend to. You have to be extremely intentional to not allow the trappings of power to get to your head. And that, in many ways, us in the political world, can either be legislated upon and, such that those things that make people, grand and all that, are less, affect people less. Like in those Scandinavian countries, they legislate in such a way that, whether you're a minister, you go through the normal life. You don't have the lead cars and all those things that get.
Those are the countries where we have leaders who ride bicycles.
Leaders who ride bicycles and things like that. Those are legislated, and they're done in such a way to protect the servant leadership aspect. That a leader gets in there and remains a servant because he interacts with his people freely, and they are able to access them. But if you notice, for every African president, every leader who comes, whether it's a prime minister, a minister, and it's not a prism of Uganda, but you see that the trappings around them are what actually get to their heads, and they forget the people, because then they can't access the people they need, and the people they need can't access them. It's always that's where I think the issue is. But
someone would say maybe the risks are different.
I agree.
Scandinavians and African states.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the risks are different, but there are many things. There are many ways you can mitigate them, and strong intelligence services is one of them. But that said, really, it has to go back down into legislation. Really. If you can't be able to legislate around issues such as the trappings of power, then you can really have someone who is there and doesn't.
But you can even have laws in place, but you have a bad leader. Someone would say, one would argue and say maybe it goes back to the individual's character, how they were actually trained, leadership, grooming.
There was a debate earlier, some time back, around servant leadership, when President Museveni said he's not a servant to anyone. People many times people take things out of context. I totally agree with that statement. That in the African context, when someone called you a servant, he made it was seen as a derogatory term. Besigye would go and say Museveni is our servant. He should he should
do ABCD.
He should be our but reading on, I learned that there was a difference between being a servant and servant leadership.
Mm.
Because in effect, leadership,
Mm.
you lead, and being servant leadership would mean that you humble yourself while you lead others,
Mm.
while you lead them, give them the ideas and the vision and everything.
Mm.
You are with them, right?
Mm.
So there's a difference between servant leadership and the one calling a leader a servant.
Mm.
We used to call maids at home servants. Those are your servants.
Mm.
This was a colonial thing,
Mm.
you know. But I think what we lack right now.
Maybe we take the word out of context.
Yeah.
Servant simply means somebody who is at your disposal to serve you.
To serve you.
Yeah.
I agreed.
So
But
if
like I
somebody
said,
is
the context.
in the doctrine of servant leadership, it would mean that somebody whose leadership is dedicated to serving the people, doing the things that the people want.
I agree with you.
Mm.
I agree with you entirely. But that's why I'm saying,
Mm.
if you call someone a servant, it is derogatory in our context. That people even no longer call, they call them helps. While the colonialists used to call their workers servants.
Mm.
You know, you can go. It's in the Bible. The texts are so many. Servants are servants.
So
Anyway, what I'm saying really, to emulate his servant leadership is going to be is very difficult for African leaders because of what they have decided amongst themselves to be, and there are those trappings around them. So for me, it's a question of just context. You know, it's a question of context, and I think it's high time that we look down and go back into trimming the trappings of power, so that people can the servant leadership can be exhibited.
Maybe we need to go as far as to look at how these leaders actually get into these offices. Maybe
that too.
Doesn't that define whether you'll be a servant leader or not?
I mean, we have seen people who have gotten to power with the power of the gun, and they have ended up being leaders, servants, exhibiting servant leadership.
The Traores in West Africa.
The Traores in West Africa. I mean, even President Museveni, to a very large extent. So I think it doesn't matter how you come in. It's how you carry yourself. You know, that is that individual aspect about
the late Pope Francis.
Yeah.
Well, within the context of humility and servant leadership, one of the remarkable things the Pope did was to visit the region, the Great Lakes region.
Yes.
Of course, background to his visit, there was an explanation why he was coming. One of the things he was much concerned about, beyond coming to see where the matters of Namugongo, of Uganda are, was the issue of instability in the Great Lakes region. And in one of his much talked about trips, he went to South Sudan, the youngest country in the world, and symbolically kissed the feet of General Salva Kiir, the president, and Dr. Riek Machar, his political nemesis. And as we speak now, they are at war. And some people were actually reflecting on that and saying, as we mourn the Pope, as we pay tribute to him, we need to find a way to actually address the conflicts that have persisted in the Great Lakes region. Your take?
My take, I think, looking at his visit, especially the one of 2015 in this area, the East African region, he came to Kenya, he came to Uganda, he went to, I think, DRC and South Sudan. And the aspect that he was addressing different issues at different times. In Kenya, he really talked about corruption as a thing that was really hurting the people. He talked about he interacted with the youth, and I think his calls were largely hard. There were some reforms around youth engagement in the politics of Kenya.
And you later on saw what the youth did.
Yes, and in 2017, you could see the race between the old and the young, the Odingas versus the Uhurus. I think you could see that the youth were largely influencing that election. And when he came to Uganda in 2015, it was the first time Besigye and President Museveni were shaking hands in 15 years.
Yeah, we saw that.
It was such a moment, and every bishop was busy trying to build onto it, calling for dialogue between the two individuals and everything. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Because of our dynamics in the politics. One doesn't want to show that he has been compromised, or he wants to please his base, which is radical. I think that's,
and the other one does not want to share power.
No, not necessarily. The other one, I think, is a more compromising leader. I think for me, he has exhibited that he tolerates many of his rivals. He has worked with UPC, shaken hands with UPC. He has shaken hands with BP. He has reached out to many people who left FDC. So I feel like he has that ability to reach out. While the other, like now, if Bobby Wine wants to kill his radical base, he goes and shakes his hand with President Museveni, and that will be it. Just a photo. But as a leader, you do not necessarily have to listen to your fan base. You do the right thing, and we have seen leaders like Nelson Mandela who said, as much as African blacks we are fighting to the death to get our rights, let us accommodate these people, and shook his hand. So in Uganda, he of course came with a message of human rights. I think at the time, tolerance in the political space, but also he visited. After visiting the matters, he visited the Namugongo, I think health. There's a health center there, and highlighted the role of the church in the healthcare, which was an indictment really on the government's investment in healthcare. That was something that those who were wise should have picked on. The Catholic Church is taking on a lot of the responsibility, not a lot, but significant responsibility from the government by getting involved in the healthcare, whether it is in Zambia, whether it is those different areas that they partake. So that was it here. When he went to DRC, it was a question of conflict, asking for tolerance, the war-torn areas, and for me, I felt like he took so many risks. He was a very risky pope. He kept. He never shied away from conflict.
Areas of conflict.
He went there. He went to Central African Republic in the midst of a war. Called for a ceasefire, which happened for the period that he was there.
He was even in Iraq in 2021.
Yes, and I think
went to East Timor.
Yeah, I think that will be his legacy. The other legacy I really see that is significant around the Catholic Church was his ability to reach out to the other religious sects,
denominations.
And all. He was able to do that. I think he did it in Egypt. He did it in I think also in Central African Republic. Going to places for the Muslim in the Muslim communities, reaching out where
preaching religious tolerance.
Yes, like I think in Central African Republic it was a question of a conflict of Christian versus Muslim, and he really went there and reached out to the Muslim community, reached out to the Christian community. They were able to get like a ceasefire for a period of time. So that was the man trying to influence issues around
the world,
especially in the leadership. I think his latest issue that he was trying to deal with was, of course, the Israeli-Palestinian war, and he was really strong on ceasefire.
Yeah, and that is the message he re-echoed.
Yeah,
in his last appearance on Easter Day.
Yeah,
called for ceasefire.
Yeah, he was always calling for a ceasefire. He was always calling for humanitarian aid to Gaza. He was calling for a two-state solution. People living side by side. He was so he was that symbol, and that influential person that really wanted to to make a difference, and the world for sure will miss him.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. Today we are reflecting on the legacy of Pope Francis. Pope Francis passed on yesterday at the age of 88. He had reigned over the Catholic Church for 12 years, but we should also take note that he was the head of the Vatican state. Therefore, he was also a leader in the political sense of it, fondly remembered for being a pontificate of peace, for peace, given his hard work and actions towards bringing about peace in areas that are with conflict. We've been joined by a second guest who is none other than Mr. Henry Kasacha Mobiru. Mr. Henry Kasacha Mobiru is Executive Director, Dialogue and Democracy Training Center, but he also comes from the Democratic Party. Mr. Mobiru Kasacha Henry, very quickly, Pope Francis passes on, leaves behind a legacy, things that we can reflect on. We've just been discussing with your colleague here about some of the remarkable things, including his humility, his push for peace, his ability to talk about things like human rights and political tolerance. The question is, how come all these places where he has been to, the leaders have not endeared or have not followed the message that he has been passing on? What lessons do you think we can get from him, given his works and legacy as a pope?
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, our listeners and our viewers. It's indeed very sad that we lost Pope Francis, and we shall continue remembering him for what he stood for, particularly at this time when he has left. I think he has left when the world is getting more dangerous, and he has been a voice of peace. Globally, many leaders are becoming very selfish, and what we see in the Gaza, all these developments are even threatening to change, or they are calling for rethinking of this global system that we are in, where we have standards that can no longer be followed, where we have wars that have gone beyond the laws of war, and where we see countries more inward looking. And we have lost a pope that has been an advocate for the global peace, and also an advocate for good governance. So I think that one of the challenges why many of these places he has visited is there is a general shift now in the world, and the world is becoming so inward looking. And this is one of the reasons why I think we are not seeing that they have listened to him and they have heeded to his advice, especially for peace. Global responsibility is dying, and people are all for themselves, and this is where we are moving to. So at such a time, why we are not seeing so much change, or we don't see a big impact of his message, is because the world is now moving into a very difficult direction, a direction that is making everybody very selfish. They are all inward looking. The international system can no longer hold the peace we are talking about. The standards have been set, but nobody, they are being violated by the powers, and nobody can say anything. So this is why we are not seeing that his message has sunk in at this time. I think one of his challenges has been not only to promote peace, but also to contribute to redirecting the world, because the way the world is moving now, with this inward looking and global responsibility is dying away, we are likely to see the people he stood for suffering more and more. And this is the challenge that we're facing.
All right, Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90. We're going to go for a break. When we return, we'll continue with the discussion, reflecting on the life and the works of the late Pope Francis. But we do encourage you to share with us your views via the WhatsApp line 0703 090 090. Let's take that break. We'll continue after these messages. Well, thank you so much for staying with us live on Spectrum Radio 1 FM 90. And our topic of discussion, we're looking at lessons from the leadership of the late Pope Francis. Late Pope Francis did pass on yesterday. He succumbed to a stroke, coma, and irreversible cardiovascular collapse, according to the doctors at the Vatican. And we have already been notified that his funeral is going to take place on Saturday, and thereafter there will be a conclave to choose a successor. And there are so many, predictions being made, including some people suggesting that this could be time for Africa to actually get a pope. There are front runners whose names have been projected, including one from Africa and the other one from Asia, from the Philippines to be specific. But the decision will be made by cardinal electors who will enter the conclave after the funeral on Saturday. My two guests in studio, Mr. Henry Kasacha, he's Executive Director, Dialogue and Democracy Training Center. He comes from the Democratic Party. And Mr. Isaac Kayonde, Political and Policy Analyst, is also a member of the NRM. Now, Mr. Kasacha, I want to get back to you even before we bring in Mr. Kayonde, who has had a lot to say before you actually came in. For Ugandan leaders, you people are in politics. What are some of the lessons that we can learn from the legacy of Pope Francis? The things that come to your mind very quickly.
Well, apart from humility and being concerned about the most disadvantaged people, I think what we are seeing is a very big contrast with our politics here and our political leaders and what the Pope stood for. Where the Pope is standing up for very poor people, looking for peace. People here are more self-centered. You're looking at what is happening in Parliament. At first it started as a rumor that people have got 100 million. Then you have a member of the Central Executive Committee confirming publicly, calling a meeting that we have called and given people money. And this is a country that is going to be hit by aid cuts. The USAID has closed, and if you look at how much USAID has been pumping into our services, you would be thinking that parliamentarians right now would be thinking on how to support this budget. But somehow they get money to share somehow in very funny ways, and after a week somebody comes and confirms that we have given people money. At least we should have more. If I was also a member, I would have gotten, then we'll be sharing here. Now, this is a kind of big contrast. And it shows you how people have become so selfish. I think the motivation for leadership now in this country has gradually changed. People are no longer into service. People are more into the material benefits that come with the elective office. And this is, I think, that many of them will not make sense in what the Pope stood for. Many will not make sense in the humility he stood for. Many will not make sense in how he reached out to those people who are very disadvantaged. So it will be a reflection, and I call upon all of them to reflect on this challenge. You know, when you lose somebody like a Pope, it's a time to reflect on the values of leadership. Because many times we never get time to discuss the values we stand for, and also the values we see in our leaders, and also to understand their actions and behaviors. It is only through discussing people like Pope Francis that we look for those values and ask ourselves, do we see these values in our leaders? If we do not see these values in our leaders, the death of the Pope will be just an event. People will not, they'll mourn for 6 days and go back to do what they're doing. So it's a call on reflection of leadership. And this is why, personally, I even ventured to run into politics. We need a renewal of leadership. We need to renew the political class. And we need to have a political class that is motivated by service, is motivated by the people suffering, is motivated by making sure that this country develops. Unless we do that, we are not going to have people like Pope Francis in this country. We are going to have people who are glorifying themselves, who want to accumulate as much as they can at the expense of the taxpayer. So where we are at the country now, especially if you look at the budget, in terms of the budget, and looking at USAID being one of our biggest donors here, the cuts they have cut, and where this money was going, and how people have begun suffering because they don't have money to support their health. And then you look at the leadership, and the discussion is extremely different. So it's a big challenge that we face as a country. And it calls upon all of us, even we the voters, we must rethink how we are voting. I mean, people are just voting for the sake of voting. They don't attach their well-being to their votes. They don't attach their development to their votes. They don't listen to a message and say this person is simply sloganeering and this person is simply doing this. But provided you have given them 1,000 or 2,000 shillings, they vote for you. So it's going to call to take all of us. Number one, to reflect. We need to change the mindset. We need to shift the thinking, and we need to change our politics. We cannot remember Pope Francis if we do not change our politics. What he stood for, just a dose of that should enter into our political system. Then that will be remembered in Pope Francis. But otherwise, his death will be just like an event. We shall mourn for 5 weeks, for 5 days or 6 days, and after burial, people move on, which is very unfortunate for a country like Uganda.
Right. I mean, Mr. Isaac Kayonde, one thing that comes to mind when you talk about issues of religion and the politics, you know, here they will tell you religious leaders do not comment on politics. Once you do that, you're getting into the murky waters and you're being partisan. The Pope was both a religious leader and a head of state, and was able to maneuver and make statements that in politics they would say speaking truth to power, being able to face people in the eyes and tell them what you're doing is not right. What lessons would the religious leaders in Uganda take when it comes to, you know, balancing their office and the issues that surround them, including politics?
Well, I think that stems from how one sees politics. Many people think politics is a moral contest, which it isn't. Morals are very high in settings of religion, but in politics, I mean, politics might mean going to war and killing people and defending territories. I mean, so politics, even us who Bible believing and following people, we know that Jesus never confronted politicians directly. He kind of scattered around the idea of politics, and you know, the Bible also talks about leaders being chosen by God, bad or good, and all those things. But so politics is quite different and quite sensitive compared to religion. I mean, religion has a certain dogma. You believe like this, and that's it, and that's it. But merging and fusing the two is a recipe for disaster, as we saw, you know, pre-independence, Catholics, Anglican, and the divisions that came with it. You look at a situation like Kawempe, where Mr. Saka here was coming from, and
was a candidate.
And his name Henry clearly did not favor him in the population that is largely Muslim, you know, and the contest. You know, NRM, we went searching. We even left a fellow NRM person who was probably on the ground and went to look for someone else, you know. So it's a very tricky situation when you mix politics and religion. So we need to be very careful that we can all have our beliefs and still, you know, pursue the greater good. And what we can borrow are some of those moral attributes in our numerous religions, right? But without necessarily copying and pasting, because that for me is where the problem is. We need to be very distinct. Now, when you talk about you know, religious leaders speaking truth to power, it's a no-brainer, you know, that yes, they should be able. But what I don't think they should be doing is influencing voters based on their religion. They shouldn't do that. But as far as their morals, moral standards, and pushing for their moral stance in their various religions, I think that I support completely.
Henry Kasacha, your take on that? Religious leaders balancing politics and the offices that they hold. Here in Uganda, of course, you know, they start. One of the religious leaders who can be remembered for speaking truth to power was the late Cyprian Kizito Lwanga, from the Catholic. Normally used the chances that he had wherever he was speaking to the public to say one or two things. His homily always included current affairs, including issues of human rights, good governance, among others.
Well, I think that what we have to understand is that whatever the religious leaders speak about is biblical. The Bible has talked about almost everything in this society. The Bible has talked about leadership. The Bible has talked about caring. The Bible has talked about war. The Bible has talked about everything. And what the religious leaders do is to remind us of the biblical and religious values and positions on how we should behave. So when religious leaders stick to the biblical teachings, they will say what you call telling truth to power. They will not compromise. They will not be compromised. They will not think about your personal political consequences. If people are being beaten in Kawempe and they're being beaten by a policeman, there's nothing that will stop a religious leader from saying the Uganda police should not do this. What we saw is not right. And the religious leaders have often talked to government directly. You have been at functions where their government representatives and religious leaders have been bold enough. And when they speak, people in government should not take it like they are attacking us or they are becoming opposition. They are actually telling them to realign themselves with the values and purpose of leadership. That is what we should have. Now, we have a country where we have seen gradually many being seemingly compromised by material benefits. We are seeing that the Christians can no longer look after their bishops. And if they can't look after their bishop, somebody has to come and donate a car to a bishop. And for you to get a car, you must be in the good books of so many people. It's not uniform that every bishop now gets a car from the president. But those good bishops will get cars. So people begin striving to be in the good books. We have even seen.
I have not seen a bishop in this country who has been enthralled and has not been given a car.
Yes, there are some who have not been given cars. Maybe the cars are coming, and maybe that is also another way of controlling people. You know, a patronage system does not simply work like that. Your car has not come because maybe this and that. Maybe you are over-hosting so many people. Maybe you are becoming too vocal on this issue. So you find that many of them begin gradually shying away and begin grossing over very fundamental issues where they will be coming out. And this has also had an impact because this country has become so rebellious that even when religious leaders speak, people don't listen. You find that we have an episcopal letter has been issued. All the sermons have been going on Easter, talking about corruption all over the place. When all these people are attending, they're in full attendance, and people talk about all these issues. But what happens next is totally different. So we have a rebellious society now, and this rebellious society is sparing nobody, be it a religious leader. They will even heckle a religious leader. They will heckle a president. I mean, even when you go to the caucuses now, even in the political parties, people are becoming so rebellious. I mean, the NRM caucus of today is not the caucus of 15 years ago. DP of today is the DP of 15 years ago. FDC is not the same. So we are having, and this is happening all across the country. So when you see religious leaders, and it's up to them to not shy away from their biblical roles, to guide the society. And guiding the society will not be praising. They're not campaigning for anybody. But they are trying to talk to the leaders that what is happening is not in line with the biblical teachings. And that is a very big issue that we have to talk about. So I would encourage the religious leaders to not to give up, despite all this rebellious society we are moving into, to maintain their call. The idea that religious leaders should not get into politics is really trying to divert them. I mean, politics and religion are one and the same thing. There is no difference. You cannot say so and so. Once you are a leader, even if you lead the border 2010, even this man Chitata who was commanding borders, even how Utoda was, anybody in a leadership position has influence and followers. Now, how they use their office depends on the values they stand for. Now, the more when you get into government, you get access to coercive forces, and how you use the police will depend on on the values you stand for. So, this religious calling is always just to align people. I don't think the religious citizens have been telling people to vote for particular people. They have not got into partisan politics. But the issues they speak about inform the voters' opinion
All right.
on who is the right person to vote for.
All right. Condolence message has finally come in from President Yoweri Museveni, and it's a message sent to His Eminence Pietro Paroli, Secretary of State, Apostolic Palace in the Vatican City, and what he says: His Holiness Pope Francis will be remembered as an extraordinary spiritual leader and a deeply respected theologian whose unwavering commitment to the faith revitalized the Church's mission in an increasingly secular world. His voice for peace, social justice, compassion, and humility touched the hearts of millions and inspired hope among the faithful. That's a message from President Yoweri Museveni, who actually has eulogized the late Pope Francis. He says his readiness and enthusiasm to deal with other faiths, such as Muslims, the Orthodox Christians, etc., meant that he was a religious leader that was truly in Kisinde, track of Jesus, as Jesus taught us in the parable of the Good Samaritan in the book of Luke. His legacy of love, unity, and severe humanity will endure generations to come. That's a message from Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, President of the Republic of Uganda, to the Vatican as he mourns the late Pope Francis. We have messages coming in from the listeners, and I begin with this from Thomas, listening to us from Nankulavye. He says, "These below make the pontiff incomparable with the world leaders. Our leaders are measuring in the opposite of the things Pope Francis stood for. Here are a few of his standout issues. 1, a focus on humility and simplicity. He chose not to live in the traditional papal apartments. 2, emphasizing mercy, social justice, and care for the poor. 3, strong support for environmental protection. His cyclical Laudato addresses talked about climate change. And then he talks about advocating for interfaith dialogue and outreach to marginalized communities." That's his Thomas, listening in from Nankulavye. Benon Fred Twinamasiko says the Pope had humility because he had lived the contrasting lives, much as some leaders tend to forget the far they have come from when they reached the top. May his soul rest in peace, and hope the next Pope will have the same patience he had. Then we have Yiga Samuel Mary, listening in from Namlondo Zone in Boyogerere. He said, "Thank you for the show. Sincerely speaking, the Pope fought a good fight, and I do commiserate with the Catholic fraternity over his demise. But he will be remembered for his advocacy for human rights and peace in the world. Unfortunately, he has not seen that happening because we have gotten some greedy heads of state who want violence and killing citizens. Because best regards to his fellow Democratic Party, Comrade Henry, and they wish him the best in the race to revive the Democratic Party." I don't know what is happening there, Mr. Kasacha, on the issue of the Democratic Party. Maybe next time we'll be discussing that. Well, those are the comments that we have got, but let's look at the message from President Yoweri Museveni a little bit, and begin with you, Mr. Kayonde. I've read out the message you had. Is the President spot on his message?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the President had the opportunity to be with him and host him, so he had a one-on-one with him, and I think he knew the man and what he stood for. Also, perhaps his later message was he might have been waiting for confirmation. Who knows whether the Pope was dead? He did. But he's spot on what he stood for, and his service to his people. Yeah,
Mr. Kasacha.
Yes, I think that the President is spot on, particularly how the Pope has moved from his spiritual leadership to influence the secular worlds, and also trying to reach out to other faiths and trying to make religion the same, without trying to move into compartmentalizing the society through religious values. I mean, different faiths we're having, and I think this is where we are moving into. That the Pope has, as a spiritual leader, tried to unite the world, including reaching out to different religious beliefs, but also influencing this secular world. The secular world has now taken over, and we are seeing more of the secular thinking than these traditional religious based kind of societies. And what is the role of religion in this kind of society? Is it to maintain, or is it to reach out and try to influence? So I think the President has been spot on, looking at how the Pope has tried to use his position to talk about for peace, to speak about war, to reach out for peace. I mean, this has been the Pope, and I think the President is spot on this.
Very quickly, Mr. Kayonde, there's going to be a transition. We are going to get a new Pope after the burial of Pope Francis. I think there's a talk. They will tell you that Africa and Asia are the places where the Catholic faith is growing very fast. Any chance we might get the first black Pope?
Well, I mean, we hope so, but even last time, I think there were two, the Nigerian fellow and another Ghanaian before.
The Nigerian now is above 80.
Above 80, he can't stand. But, well, that will really be a shocker if we get that black Pope.
A shocker? Why do you call it a shocker?
No, I mean, tradition is tradition. I mean, if for so many years that the Catholic Church has existed, the existence of black people and black Catholics has been really for a long time. I mean, it's long overdue. But who knows? There might be a Barack Obama in the Catholic Church. So I'm not very optimistic that it will happen. I think maybe the outcry of the people who want to see this might ask and might overwhelm the cardinals, but still I feel like this may not be the time. Yeah.
The transition process, how it is handled.
Yes.
What's your take about it?
My take is that, look, people who want to compare the transition of the Catholic Church to our numerous, and I was listening to Mr. Isaka here talking about how religion and leadership, and I wanted to get into some religious argument, but I said, you know what, it may not suffice for this program, but things like democracy are not really addressed vividly in the Bible. And if you look throughout the Bible, the only one time they exercised democracy, they picked a bad leader, and God said, you know what, go back to me choosing for you leaders. And when you see how the Pope is elected, but is never contested, you know, so you're there, there's no contest of power whatsoever until death. You know, it helps in many ways to create that unity. Imagine if they were electing a pope every 5 to 3 years. You know, it would be a disaster. I mean, we have seen it in the Anglican Church, where the GAFCON have split from the Church of England, and you know all these things. The American Episcopal Church breaks off from the Anglican. It's a very there's a whole mess around elections. You know, so we need to desist from copying and pasting. Otherwise, if it was a thing of dictating that power should not be contested, I think maybe that would be better for our country. We don't waste money in elections. We don't waste these different things. But because democracy dictates that we go for the election, I think ours is a unique case.
Katarcha, time for an African Pope?
Well, I'm not so excited about that, and I don't think people should be excited about that. And I think that the Catholic Church should be respected to go through this process in accordance with the Catholic teachings. If you have not done theology, you don't know religion. And if you don't know religion, you may be tempted to equate it to your day-to-day life. And then you begin now doing all sorts of scenarios. You all go to church every Sunday, but there's no question answer time. Even if the sermon is for 4 hours, but there's no time where you say now, any questions?
All right.
So religion is religion. We should respect it.
All right.
We should not be excited about whether we have a black pope or. I think what we should be concerned with that the Catholic Church should continue.
All right.
And
With that,
we have entrusted that process to protect the Catholic Church.
all right. With that, let me thank you, gentlemen, for sparing your time to come here and share your views about the demise and the lessons that we can take from the life of Pope Francis, the head of the Catholic Church, who was going to be with the Lord. He has also been that man who has crusaded for peace, and we hope that the next Pope will indeed emulate him, and the leaders across the globe will follow his example. I've been your host, Kenneth Anderson Lukwago. Up next, we have the news in English with Miss Josephine Dagano. Thereafter, we'll have the Soul Train with BB.